welcome to the Anti-Heroes podcast with your host, Zach Blair. I am Zach Blair, and I am so honored and thrilled to be bringing you this interview today with my guest, John Schmersal. John Schmersal has played in the highly influential and seminal band Brainiac, the band Enon. He currently plays in Caribou. He also scores film. He has his own bands. This is just a really, really interesting guy. And like all of my guests on this podcast, these are guys that are bringing something interesting to the world of guitar playing and doing something and making it their own, pushing the envelope, and they're probably not getting enough recognition for it, and that is criminal. So we get into all these things. We get to talk about his gear. We get to talk about his motivations and his influences. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoy talking to him. I didn't know John prior to this, and now I do, and I couldn't be happier. So sit back and enjoy my interview with John Schmersal. This is my guest, John Schmersal. For those who don't know, hopefully, A, I'm pronouncing his name correctly. B,
good job.
Good, thank you. B, John has been in the bands Braniac, Enon. He currently plays in Caribou. He scores film and I think TV. Do you do TV as well?
I haven't done any of that stuff in a while, actually, but I have. So that's the important part.
And you have your own bands as well. Let's talk about all of that. But yeah, I guess let's talk about right now the history of your guitar playing. We're going to get real nerdy and talk about all the stupid shit that people usually don't like to talk about that I get dorky about. My whole point of this is to talk to guitar players that I think are doing interesting, compelling things that maybe aren't on the covers of guitar magazines, and you definitely fall in that category. I've been a huge fan of your work for quite a long time and wanted to ask you a bunch of questions. So,
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So what's the history of your playing? Like who are your guys? Who are your influences?
I mean, I think early on, like Sonic Youth was definitely a really big one. John, I would say like sort of in the early part of like guitar playing, like John Fahey and and Sonic Youth are kind of like the polar opposites of, or maybe they're not very polar opposite, but they're, you sort of two different fields of playing, and sort of the things that I kind of admired the most and, maybe borrowed in my own way to try and create my own language.
That's an interesting gap between John Fahey and Sonic Youth. I think the narrative could be made. I think the bridge could be made, between those two, as far as like genre pushing and thinking outside the box, and really just not listening to anyone or doing their own thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think maybe early on, like you and I both come from kind of a punk rock background, which I think sort of necessarily doesn't always, it depends on whether, a lot of people don't necessarily end up branching out, listening to other music, but that was sort of like the starting point. There was this band that I got, the first band I kind of got like more obsessed with in a like sort of like, how are they doing this sort of thing? When I first started playing guitar was this band from Athens, Georgia called the Barbecue Killers. And, that was, I think, the first record that I would just like put on, like what's going on in these songs. And like, I would like sit down and like basically play against their record comely from like beginning to finish. Right. And that was sort of like my first like education on sort of like, they had like power chords and stuff in it, but they were really also kind of creating their own weird, like Southern approach to like punk music. There was like, droning open strings and, and like just like chord fragments and stuff like that. And I just sort of like kind of picked through that to see what they were doing. And the drums too, actually. I was trying to, when I was in high school, I bought like my neighbor's drum kit in a garage sale and obsessively tried to learn how to play drums, and so I was like playing that record back to back on drums and guitar, like kind of obsessively, like for a year or two there in high school.
I gotta admit, you stumped me. I've never heard of that band, but now I really want to check that out.
If you You know the documentary Athens, Georgia, Inside Out by chance?
I know of. I haven't seen it, and it's something that's been recommended to me and that I've had written down because I'm such a fan of outsider music that was made in the South because I'm from Texas, and
Mm.
you're almost like you almost have 10 steps ahead of you that you need to sort of to catch up to anybody on the coast. So if somebody's making their own statement and they're from the South, I'm automatically interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that same way in the Midwest,
Oh, for
growing up in
sure.
Ohio. It's like you sort of like everyone's sort of looking to the coasts for information and culture, and so anytime, yeah, anytime anyone was sort of like already kind of self-formed and doing things in the Midwest, it was very exciting to see that
Totally.
happening locally.
The chips were stacked against us. We didn't have the benefit of being from either coast. So we didn't already have the sort of groundwork laid out for us. Like, oh, you're from the West Coast. Here is SST Records, or, oh, you're from New
Right,
York.
right.
Here's what's going on at CBGB's that you can align yourself with. Here is your scene. Go for it. Go and do likewise. And we didn't have that benefit, being in the Midwest or South or Tech, whatever. Well, that's really interesting. And it doesn't. From what I have taken away from your guitar playing, I don't know if I'm too far off. And I hear things like Adrian Ballou and Robert Fripp, and it's definitely with the Enon stuff. I hear fragments of that. I don't know if I'm right or if I'm wrong
Oh,
there.
that's cool. I got into Fripp a little more later. One thing I'm not as a guitar player is dexterous. I don't really do a lot of like. I've never been that interested in guitar solos, and so
Sure.
I never went through like running myself through like the relay races to become really good at playing like fast runs. And I might so every once in a while I've incorporated like maybe a run into something, or I did later eventually find myself doing sort of like quasi guitar solos, but almost begrudgingly. I felt like, all right, like this is happening in the song, but I really don't. I don't feel like one. It's a great interest of mine, uh, and because of that, I'm not good at it either because I've never
Well,
pursued it really to sort of make it a part of my thing. But I kind of think about Fripp in two senses. Like he's obviously a very accomplished, dexterous guitar player, but I think the things that I like about his playing are the weird scales and also just kind of the more repetition, the stuff that he does that's more like really hypnotic. But yeah,
yeah.
I think early on when I got interested, I didn't I knew of Fripp and King Crimson and all that stuff, but I was kind of more engaged like in the early years of high school. It was like, very, very far flung, like, punk rock, Sonic Youth, John Fahey, like Michael Hedges, like
Yeah.
the kind of
Yeah.
guitar stuff that's like I was a bit into that new age stuff and getting into Indian music and getting into jazz and stuff like
Right.
that. And so it was just like my head was just kind of spinning with, all those kinds of things and
That's really interesting. That's really
yeah.
and John Fahey. That's a reference I wouldn't have gathered, and I think it's so interesting now. Like, I'm talking like say the Enon song "Natural Disasters." That guitar work in that I've always thought is just so amazing and so cool. And did any of the art rock guys from the New York scene influence you? Like, the sort of like I don't know, Arto Lindsay or somebody like that.
Yeah, I guess so. You think about I kind of think about it in layers. Like high school was sort of like the beginning of when you're figuring things out for yourself. And I went to college for a couple of years before I joined Brainiac, and it was a highly confusing time just musically because you're going there for this thing. It was great taking the like sort of general courses, and I did enjoy it in that sense. But I was also really neurotic because I didn't. The more I went down the rabbit hole of being in college, the less I felt like connected to it as like a career path or whatever. The more I had to get into sort of core stuff, the more I realized like you know, it just felt like a road to nowhere that like, and what I really wanted to be doing, of course, was being in a band. And,
Right.
but around that time, yeah, I was surrounded by a lot of interesting people at the college I went to in the scene there. And yeah, kind of still like I got a mixtape of all the early New York guys and a bunch of the current Knitting Factory people like in the early
Right.
'90s and stuff like that. And so yeah, One of the guys, actually, old friend of mine now, he passed away right around the end of Brainiac as well. But he really influenced me locally as a guitar player. Not anyone that anyone knows, but he was sort of like hand feeding me a lot of those guys, like Fred Frith and stuff like that. Like I would definitely say Fred Frith is like I really admire him. I don't know if I could. I mean, I guess I'm influenced by him, but I think more just like in a sense, I have deep admiration for him for the kind of like the boundaries he broke and genres and stuff like that.
Okay, so I wasn't too far off. I actually was going to reference Fred Frith as well, and only in the fact that like it seems like that same spirit of I'm going to take my influences and I'm going to do my thing with it. That's sort of imitable. No one sounds like you really your guitar playing. I think everything you do is wholly unto yourself, and I'm a huge fan. Yeah,
oh, thank you.
That's the most admirable thing that I think any musician, the true level of success is being able to, sort of do the, like not be able to see who's playing and go, oh, that's so and so. I don't think I've ever achieved that, and I've always wanted to aspire to that, and you definitely have. So, yeah, that's amazing. Well, good.
I think the other thing about it is, sort of like my early years in high school, just like kind of flailing about, and then really maybe more precise flailing out in those early college years, sort of like a guy I was telling you about. He and I would get together and, besides like listen to all the, music of the time, like the early Knitting Factory scene and stuff like that. I was buying like cheap thrift store guitars all the time. And so we would just like set up guitars around the room as like prepared guitars in different tunings and like play them with sticks. And, I could get really wild with him. And he was like, he was really out there as a guitar player, but also very accomplished. So I felt it was like a way that, I felt comfortable being like free to do whatever with him in a real wild way, but also he could be very technically precise. He was already very, very accomplished. And so it was kind of like an interesting way to combine like these skill sets. And then when I joined Brainiac, I really feel like I was sort of like trying to teach myself by ear how to manipulate a guitar, like not being boxed into like the positions and the stuff of standard tuning. I wanted to pick up a guitar and not really be that conscious of like the tuning itself. Just sort of like when I put my fingers down, when you're on a piano, it's like the more you play a piano, it's static, and so you can continue this like sort of relationship of these positions. But like I was just literally trying to teach my ear how to move about on the fly, and I mean, I think that was valuable, but it wasn't until I joined Brainiac that like Tim, I guess I'm saying like Tim was a really fundamental part of giving me structure, because he already was working within like 3 pretty specific alternate tunings that had variations. And so all of a sudden I like joined this thing and there was like a blueprint, a framework to work within. And that was very helpful, because otherwise I probably would have like continued to work in my kind of like chaotic, learning by tone and stuff like that, and not being able to just sort of thrive and develop techniques within certain tunings, which I think is very important,
Right. And how important is that, in those formidable years to sort of be learning from somebody you respect, and they're going, you know what? Maybe not so much like Ornette Coleman, where it's like there is no key, there is no time signature, there is no tune, but to go, just express yourself. Don't worry about how it sounds. Just pick up that guitar, whatever it's tuned. Just make music. Just go. That is. I'm envious of that. That would have been amazing.
I mean, I think the other thing for me, my friend Brandon, I was explaining, the one from college who passed away. He was in a similar way, it was sort of like you can do these things, but feel free to go way out there. And with right. Tim, he was, his dad was an accomplished jazz musician, and so was he, and he played with his dad in his jazz band. And so, like, the thing that I really enjoyed about both of those relationships was, like, maybe I had a tentativeness to be like I'm just going to freak out, or I want to do something very disciplined, approaching it. And he, a lot of times Tim would encourage my mistakes, basically. Like, we were in the studio, and I remember like having a line and playing something, and I'm like, I met like the last note I wanted to be sharp, and he was like, oh man, it's great. It sounds like Chet Baker or something like that. And I was just
That's great.
And so he sort of like, just the fluidness of, he was very much into, just moving forward and embracing, those kinds of things. So I thought that was very helpful.
That's inspirational. It's funny we're having this conversation. I just had a conversation with Brian Baker for this podcast, from Minor Threat and Dag Nasty and Bad Religion. And he said lately he's been pushing himself on stage to just, he improvises his solos on stage, and to just go like, okay, I know this song is in A, and I know, traditionally I will start the solo in A, but I'm just going to start the solo wherever, and I'm going to make that work. And as and then there might be clams, and it might be like, oh God, for a bit, but he's going to figure it out just to challenge himself. And I was like, man, that's brave, and that sounds fun. But the problem is with YouTube now, for me, I would go immediately to YouTube and go, oh, God damn it,
Yeah. I remember distinctively when, in the middle of Enon, when like the early era of, the early 2000s and stuff was going up on YouTube, and the drummer in the band, Matt Schultz, he was like, we were like going out to play a show or whatever. I think he had seen something someone had posted, and he was like, yep, like, everyone's watching. You gotta get it, gotta get it right first time. And I've sort of thought about that since, but
yeah, it's the lesson is just to not look. The lesson is just to not look.
Luckily, most of these things are not very high definition. I mean, you've seen it's taken a long time for these smartphones to catch up and have an app with a little compressor built in, for instance, stuff like that.
And it's going to sound great at some point, so you pronounce that Enon, correct?
I did.
Okay, so for me, I'm from Texas, so of course I say everything like a fucking hick, and I say Enon. So I've always said, Enon. So
you're probably over the course of the time that the band existed, I think that's probably the most popular pronunciation anyway. So don't feel like a hick, man. It's all right.
Hey, you, come on over here. You've just been chosen. Break through, let go of your fear. Don't be so frozen.
You mentioned it a tad bit, but let's talk about your gear. I did notice you use that specifically that green Tiesco Del Rey. Was that always kind of your ideas to play sort of, I guess, what would be called pawn shop guitars, sort of, things like that?
I mean, oddly, when I joined Brainiac, it was just kind of like Tyler, the drummer in Brainiac, and I went to high school together. We played in a band in high school. And for whatever, I just think it was an aesthetic thing that like I was attracted to, and happened to be happening at the same time in Brainiac. But like the summer before I joined the band, I like worked 2 jobs over the summer to save up for the year, and I ended up spending, an irresponsible amount of the money that I was supposed to be saving for that year on. But there was this amazing guitar dealer guy that would go to all the trade shows and then bring him to his shop, and he always had new stuff every week. And you know, like any of those good wheeler dealer guys, like he and I became fast friends, and so I felt like he was my friend. But he was always like, "Man, you should check this out," and like he would get, you know, he would like give me deals on bundles and stuff. But I bought basically everything that I ended up using in the band that I joined like 6 months later. Like I didn't know I was buying these things, and I don't, you know, I don't know if it was. I'd like to say that I knew what I was doing, and I was buying those things for a reason, but bottom line was, yeah, I bought all the tools I needed to join Brainiac, like, you know, 6 months before they asked me to join the band. But why that was, like, I think it was purely aesthetic. I mean, there's no real, you know, it's not like the pickups in Fiasco Del Rey's necessarily sound good. A lot of them, honestly, like that was the first thing I replaced were the pickups in those. They were still there physically. Like I had a Gibson humbucker put in the middle, but the guy took out the magnets and deactivated them, so it was just going straight to that. And those guitars didn't necessarily. I had it painted green, and I had it. The guy that did that did an amazing job. He refretted it. So, you know, it took some work to get that guitar to be what I needed it to be. But pretty much all the other guitars that Tim and I played were, I mean, you know, especially considering he was actually a really good guitar player. Like, why we were playing these impossible, like, you know, Sears Roebuck, like, quickly manufactured guitars. Like none of them played very well. I certainly don't think it lent to better technique or, you know, but it was, I will say it is part of the sound, you know. For a long time I was very into Dan Electro's and Silvertone guitars because of the lipstick pickups. They have a very specific kind of sound that I think that really, you know, certain songs in Brainiac really lent to that, you know. So
yeah, it is funny after playing those guitars, you know, and you play a character like a guitar that is made to be played well, you know, like to make it easy for you to play, like a go fast guitar, like a Ibanez or a Jackson or something like that, and you're just like, oh my god, you know, it's seriously like taking, you know, putting a weight on a bat and then taking it off or something, you know what I mean?
Oh, like, absolutely. I mean, I've been shooting myself in the foot for years, considering, but they didn't, you know, I just never been attracted to like the, you know, like Jazz Masters and Jaguars look pretty cool, I think, but by and large, I don't really like most of the bodies of guitars. I thought it was cool when Annie Clark St. Vincent came out with that guitar, because I was like, finally, someone's created a modern like guitar that kind of like is referencing those like kind of angly looking surf guitars, you know.
That's true. You know, that's true. I never really thought about it. And I mean, and before that, it's funny because before that, she was using also like a Silvertone, or, you know, those early years, she was using just same kind of thing, not a Tiesco Del Rey,
Harmony,
but something.
Yeah,
Harmony. That's what, there's a Harmony Rocket, I believe. Yeah, that's what it was.
Although I've played that Harmony and it plays very well.
Does it really?
It's a nice guitar.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, so, you know, where are you now with your guitar playing, and does it differ much from where you were back then, you know?
God, I mean, that's a very funny question. I mean, I think as I've grown, you know, post Brainiac, I got more interested in like the craft of like songwriting and, you know, being in my own band, like figuring that part out. And at first I was just sort of like, oh wow, you know, everything in the kitchen sink and anything goes. And like making the first record, I had no rules about like, you know, I don't have to use the Brainiac tunings and stuff like that. I can do whatever, including using standard tuning, which, you know, but I quickly discovered like, you know, making a record and using whatever you want. It's like, okay, there's also like a practicality to like presenting these things live. Like, I don't want to be in a situation like Lee and Thurston where they, you know, I mean, they're obviously also like a band that have been around forever, and they have like songs that are, you know, tunings for specific songs, and, you know, it's a slippery slope basically. So I quickly kind of had to sort of like hone in that again, sort of like Brainiac had, and kind of like be a little more choosy as far as, you know, what tunings were going to be used. But I mean, I think as time went by, like my process for guitar playing, like my interests in guitar playing somewhat remain the same. Like I said, I've never been that much into being like a riff player so much as like, or a solo player, you know, to be super dexterous and play a lot of notes guitar. But I've gotten a lot more into finger picking. It's sort of the extension of like what I've always admired about like John Fahey's playing. And so I've done a lot of sort of learning and unlearning of like, you know, what are kind of classical and sort of like bluegrass style finger picking. And so that I wanted to just use, like, it's not very typical to use all 5 fingers when you pick. And so I basically have been trying to create my own way of doing that, you know, when I finger pick. And it's not something that necessarily even really has shown up in records. It's just sort of like my own personal mission when I play guitar.
That's inspiring that you challenged yourself with that, because, you know, guys like you were saying with us, you know, with the backgrounds in punk rock music, it's definitely a gray area for me too, and was a weakness for me is finger picking, because we don't, you know, we didn't start with folk music, we didn't start with, you know, we started, you know, with Black Flag songs or whatever, so, you know, or Iron Maiden songs, and I that's inspirational, you know, that's inspiring that you are doing that now, you know, and kind of going back. That's great.
I mean, it's interesting to see, like, I remember my second cousins, they were like, I remember when they first really started getting interested in music, and when I would come through San Diego, and they were like both super into Green Day, and kind of just curious about guitar. And I remember like pulling out a guitar and being like, well, check this out, like showing them a power chord, and then just being like, you can play 95% of these Green Day songs like just with this chord, you know. And that was like, and then now, like, you know, my the elder one, he's like a ripping guitar player. He's way better than I am technically, you know. And I just love that. That was just like, the first foundation block was the same, you know. You could just be like, hey, check this out, you know.
It's the keys to the kingdom. It's like every Ramones song, everything. You learn this, you know, 1-5-8, you know, learn this power chord, and you're going to be able to do it all. Do you think it's the gear, or is it you?
I mean, like, I definitely think tone is a highly influential specter here, because you know, when I first that same summer of, you know, buying that I did before Brainiac, I got this Music Man HD 130 head and a 4x12 cabinet, and I mean, I still have this head. And it's the sound, you know, like I haven't had it recapped or worked on in ages, but like it's got like an overdrive section, and I can just, you know, all I have to do is just kind of push that a little bit, and it's overdriving the tubes in that way. I can turn the master down way low, and, you know, just sitting in your room, you can play, if there's good tone, you can play some really, you know, mediocre, crappy stuff, and it like, it's still, you know what I mean? It has a good sound, and so it can make the most like chattery sounding playing sound exciting still. Whereas, you know, if you're just kind of playing, it's you know what I mean? It's I think that tone can really inspire longer playing, and therefore like kind of the ability to develop things inside of things like tone and stuff like that.
Right, because if you pick up a guitar and it plays like shit and your amp sounds like shit, you're going to be like, you're not going to be inspired to write something cool. That's for sure.
And I feel like people get discouraged though too. Like you can not know any better, and you're your guitar and your amp sound like crap, and you'll think that it's you. Like if you know what I mean? Right. If you didn't know the difference, you might just think like I'm never going to sound like Eddie Van Halen or whatever. But it's like it's well, you probably won't, but it's also because your stuff doesn't sound that great to start. So
right, because you're playing dog shit. I mean, I'm glad you said that, because that opens up a really interesting conversation, because there's that old adage of like, oh, it's not the music, a poor musician blames the instrument. But if you're playing total dog shit, this kid might be able to play, War Pigs or whatever. But he's like, when I was a kid, I had an acoustic. I was like 9 years old. I could fit inside the case, and the action was an inch off the fretboard. So it was like, that was a poor instrument, and as soon as I got an electric guitar that was easier to play, I was able to play, I was able to actually, see something through.
Right.
So yeah, I fully agree with you. I'm going to blame my instrument from now on.
I mean, it's worth noting, I think.
For sure. No, it totally is. Totally.
But I feel like, again, getting back to sort of like what you learn and what like sometimes I like it's even similar with the piano, and I'm not by any stretch of the imagination someone that you want to hire as your keyboard player. I've done it before, and I
sure.
like I can learn parts to do a specific thing, but like I'm just not. I wasn't trained as a piano player. I'm kind of trying, like I'm reversing that now. I'm trying to like sort of do that on my own. Now we got a piano in our house this past December, but I feel the same way sometimes. Like I can sit in front of a piano and just like kind of improvise the way that I would on guitar, and sometimes it's great, and it's very satisfying, and sometimes like there's nothing there, and I'm like I don't like I'll be like I don't know anything, like right. I'll just be like I have no business playing guitar right now or whatever, but I feel like I sort of like I'm interested in chords, and it goes really really deep. Like I like complicated chords and
sure.
chord progressions, and like in jazz and stuff like that. But at the same time, I just feel like I like holding on to the idea that like technique and like sort of dexterity are highly overrated, because
right.
How many times, how many times over the years has there been like the best guitar player in the world is not in a good band, or
always.
Just,
I mean, it's like long division, it's like knowing long division essentially. I was the lead guitar player in Guar for a long time, so I had to like really. Yeah, I had to really like, sweep arpeggios and do all that crazy shit. I have not used that ever since. You know what I mean? Like it's fun to sit and do, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, it's like a party trick. Like, oh, I can do this. And at the end of like a Rise Against set, I'll get a chance to kind of go for it or whatever, just to, whatever. But it makes no difference. It's like if you're not bringing something interesting or compelling to the music, or if the song isn't good or whatever it might be, well, you're right. It's like, why? It doesn't matter. It's just, it's frivolity, it's fluff. That's really all it is,
Yeah.
You don't have to know it. Do you have one that got away? Do you have like a guitar or a piece of gear or something that you've lamented you had to get rid of? You got stolen?
Yes,
what
I
you got?
do. It's was a Fender Precision. It was a fretless Fender Precision, and it was the guitar or the bass I played. It was my second bass basically, and I became very versed in using it and playing it. And I mean, I played like that fretless bass in like a punk band, and
wow.
like my senior year in high school. And at some point in New York in Enon, I ended up like selling it to a music shop for some money, and this PV bass that I think the Guns N' Roses bass player had played at one point. Anyway, like I don't mean the one. I'm just saying like it was the same style. And I got it just to have another, like, just to have a bass. Basically, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get rid of this, and I can get the money I need for the particular pinch that I was in, and got this other crappy PV bass, for which I have since sold. But I remember this friend of mine telling me he didn't think that, like, he was like, oh, that's a Frankenstein. That's not like a real, like, fretless. And it sort of got in my mind. I mean, it didn't matter. The bass doesn't matter if it's like, you know, what you call it. It was an amazing bass. And anyway, it was a custom bass, and now it's gone. I've actually been very recently, like, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I've been thinking since I'm, you know, like, basically I've been thinking about gifting myself trying to replicate the same thing. I can get like
you should.
Yeah.
You're worth it. You deserve it.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks.
You betcha. Have you ever tried to track that one down? Have you ever gone back to that, like, or called that guitar shop?
Oh gosh, I mean, it was in New York. If you've been to Brooklyn, it was Main Drag Music. So it was the old Main Drag that was on Bedford, and they've since moved down.
I know that place.
A couple blocks into a bigger spot, but yeah. No, I don't know, man. And it would be cool to do that same thing. Although the reason why I kind of started getting excited again about the prospect of just getting something was Rick Lee, who was in Enon and also Skeleton Key. He also plays in my band now, Crooks on Tape. He just bought some like crappy like $75 bass that he found at a pawn shop. He was just like playing. He's like, oh, this whatever. It's like a no-name brand, but it plays really nicely. So he bought it and took it back home. He's a handy guy. He basically filed down the frets on the thing down to the base of the fretboard.
Yeah.
And it's fucking amazing. It's an amazing fretless bass. I was like, man, that's what I want to do. If I'm not going to try and buy like a Fender custom, which I think is what I'm going to do. That's what I would do.
Well, have you been back in that shop since this all happened?
Oh yeah, but that was years ago. I mean, New York, high volume, like, there's always, I feel like even asking about it, they would just be like, what year?
Yeah.
This is like over 15 years ago,
Sometimes with as oddball as stuff can be, as well, it'll sit there forever. If it's a fretless and maybe somebody doesn't want a fretless or whatever it might be, I do pie in the sky shit all the time. Like, you never know, dude, like that's always been
It's true. You know what's funny? One of the guitars I had, it was a Dan Electro I bought also in a different shop in Manhattan. But, over the years, been friends with these guys. One of the guitar players, Richie who played in Man or Aster Man. He's not in the band now, but he like came through and he's like, where'd you get that guitar? And I was like, oh, I bought it from this, whatever, Mojo Music in New York. And he was like looking it over and he's like, I own that guitar before that. That guitar used to be mine. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So, you never know. Sometimes it was a very unique guitar. It was a very like specific, thing. I'd never seen it before either. That's why I bought it. But,
what a fantastic band, Man or Aster Man. Jesus.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
God, what a great band. Total aside, but I remember reading one time that they did a thing where they had like there was the Man or Aster Man sort of variants. So there was different.
Oh yeah, the clones,
bands, yeah. And they were touring at the same time. There would be like one that was all female and one was. I was like, that is fucking genius. It's so hard to do something original, and they did it. So in closing, I won't keep you on for too long, but this is a very broad question. But what's been the biggest revelation in your guitar playing life?
I don't know. In my life, I'm not sure. Harkening back to what we were talking about in general, just like I remember sort of as the 90s were coming to a close, and it was an issue Guitar Player magazine that had like, I think Kurt Cobain was on the cover, and it was, so I was like thumbing through it, and the article was basically just sort of that thing we were talking about where it was like, like it or not, Jimmy, sitting in your bedroom, practicing your scales and stuff like that, like, you can learn to play, you know, like 64th notes or whatever, but like songwriting trumps everything. Basically, is what they're saying. Like they're sort of like using Kurt Cobain to sort of spell out like, you know, economy over you know, just
frivolity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of funny. I was like, all right, yeah, that's true. I mean, now I guess for me now is as I'm, you know, I sit in between all these things. I do stuff on computers, and you know, I'm producing things. I have keyboard things, plugins, all this, you know, all this stuff, samplers, guitar, bass, you know, piano, and so I guess I feel less focused on like any one thing in particular, and it's still more about like the songs for me, and or the worst part is I think for myself is just finishing things, because the thing that excites me the most is the initial spark of the idea, and that's like what's like when you find something new, it's like yes, like or something that you want to utilize in something. Once I've done that, it's almost like I have a lot of stuff that's unfinished, because it's just less exciting to finish them than it was to have that initial like blast of excitement, you know. So I don't know if that's a revelation or not, but that's kind of like what I'm excited about.
I think it absolutely is. I think a revelation is what makes you excited. What, you know, after guys like you and I have been doing this for a very long time, and to still get excited about something, I think that is a revelation. So I love that. And man, it was so great talking to you. And
I'll say lastly, I guess I'll just say you know, working with Dan and Caribou, you know, and he's got a very funny process for the way he like records his music, because you know, he's like an accomplished keyboardist, he's a drummer. He doesn't really like, I don't think he would ever say he can play stringed instruments very well. I don't really think he does it at all anymore, but like, you know, when he did it, I thought it was amazing. But you know, he can play music, but he's just sort of, his whole thing is he likes working in computers, and he likes, you know, sort of manipulating MIDI. And on the last record, he had a friend of ours who's an incredible guitar player, and he's actually known more for his saxophone player. But anyway, he brought him in to like, you know, be the sort of guest musician on his record, and he played a bunch of sax, and he played a bunch of like really incredible guitar stuff. But he did it through like they put in like, it was through a MIDI guitar, so it was all coming out as audio and also MIDI. And I think that for him, he was just excited to have all that information there. So it wasn't necessarily about using the takes that were like analog guitar. Like he took the MIDI from this guitar playing and like changed the sounds, or changed like whatever aspect that we wanted to, because it is limitless, and that's the way he sort of screws around with stuff. So I find that kind of stuff inspiring. I'm not really there. I don't have a MIDI, you know, pickup on it or anything for any guitars that I have, but I just, you know, that was kind of like another next level thing where I was like, all right, that's pretty badass.
Well, that's above my pay grade too, and it is, you know, at this stage of the game. You know what I mean? It's like it's so inspiring and so cool to get wowed, you know, to get introduced to something new, you know, at this, you know, and to see like there are things like that, like the whole MIDI world, and you know, computers, and you know, plugins and everything else. I mean, I know I stay in my lane. I can do a bit of it, but there's so many things that are just like, to this day, I'm like, but it kind of, for me, I don't know, for you, for me, it's those sorts of things that keep pushing me. You know, I'll never learn it all, but there's always something to learn. And so that's the reason to get up and to still try, and to still, you know, try to create and try to write.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Well, cool, John, man. Hey, thank you so much for doing this podcast. I really appreciate it. And I know it's just nerdy guitar bullshit, but it's, you know, it's all I do.
Cool.
So.
It wasn't quite that nerdy, really. I was worried you were going to start asking me about like, you know, hammer-ons and hammer-offs, or I don't know.
No, I just wanted to more talk about your, you know, Tiesco Del Rey guitar, you know.
Right on.
Yeah.
All right, well, pleasure talking to you too, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. We'll talk soon, man. I'd like to think that I have a new friend. I'm going to say that I have a new friend. I think if we're in the same area, we might text one another. Hey, dude, I'm here. Let's hang out. Let's commiserate. Let's talk about shit. But what a talented person is John Schmersal, man. And, I got to admit, of course, if, you've been a guitar player since the 90s, or you know who this guy is with his amazing work from Brainiac to Enon, which I was saying Enon because I'm from Texas and I have a dumb accent. Enon. Hey, Enon. But anyway, Enon. And now with Caribou, the guy just, man, all of his bands are amazing, and what a talented guy. And I don't know, I thought that was a great interview. Like I said, I think I've made a new friend, and I've hopefully made new friends with all of you listening. At least I'd like to thank all of you and call you my friend. And I also appreciate the folks over at MXR and Jim Dunlop. Thank you guys for supporting us, letting us do what we do here, believing in us, and making your amazing products. If you're a guitar player, bass player, musician, chances are you already have their products. And if you don't, then you should. So once again, thanks you guys for showing up. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and we're going to keep doing them. So you keep listening. Thank you guys so much. Okay, so John Schmersal, I'm going to feel remiss if I didn't leave you with some of John Schmersal's wonderful guitar playing. This is the song Natural Disasters. And just this intro guitar, these jabs that he's doing, sort of atonal and so creative, and it's hard to compare it to anybody. It's 100,000,000% John Schmersal. What an amazing player. So check this out. Natural Disasters off the High Society record by John Schmersal's band, Enon.
Disasters make it hard to mind. Birth, big cake, steak and wine. The rough around the cup that make you bust a dime. They want your heart to ache and take up all your time. The broken situations that leave no resort must give way to play and sport. Don't want to think about it, don't know what to say. So sorry that you're cross. Goodbye to you today. We've got to cut the conversation, keep it clean and dry. And if they never finish, then we won't ask why. It's just a natural disaster that you've left behind. For the cuts of cake, for the steak and wine. Keep it clean and dry. And if they never finish, then we won't ask why. It's just a natural disaster that you've left behind. For the cuts of cake, for the steak and wine. No more emotion.